Hello everyone, my name is Adam Safron. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. So I've been trying to make headway on the enduring problems of consciousness, preferably all of them. And towards this end, I have tried to bring together as many different perspectives as possible, looking for points of overlap as well as difference, and then seeing whether I can adjudicate among the different claims being made. I've mostly focused on integrated information theory and the Global Neuronal Workspace Theory because those are the best known and they have the most work done on them. However, I've personally found many theories to be very illuminating. In this integration attempt, I have made use of Ned Block's distinction between phenomenal and access consciousness, where I understand phenomenality to be experience, what it is like, subjectivity, or having a point of view on an experienced world, and access consciousness I've been understanding as awareness, or the knowledge of experience, or the ability to manipulate and report on experience. I find this distinction to be helpful, both because I actually think it's a joint in nature, and also because many of these theories, they're sometimes using the term consciousness in very different ways. And one of the different ways would be, are we talking about experience itself or our knowledge of the experience? So in the integration attempt, I have been using the free energy principle and active inference framework as an overarching house for containing different views. Predictive processing on its own, I think most people would agree, is not a sufficient theory of consciousness. However, I do think it gets us a fair amount of the way there in terms of telling us, with devils and details, about what we should be looking for in the mapping between body, brain, and mind. Specifically, the idea would be that your experience would be a kind of inference to the best guess as to the cause of your sensory observations. And even more specifically, the idea would be that your experience would be a kind of entailed probability distribution from your brain operating as a generative model. Generative models are becoming just increasingly ubiquitous in our lives. And so as opposed to discriminative models, which would be telling you, early stages of machine learning, what stimulus class do you think you have given data, you could take these networks when trained up in particular ways and go in the reverse direction. Given specifying a stimulus class, given a hypothesis about what's out there, what is a likely pattern of data? And so right here you see on the right, this is an early stage GAN. They've become much more sophisticated, but the basic idea would be that your consciousness would be this inversion of a generative model, filling in not just this pixel array, but all of your modalities to varying degrees. And the particular combination of modal filling in, this would be, and this proceeding over time, this would be the stream of experience. This is consistent, I'm not the only person saying this, Ryota Kanai and colleagues have an information generation theory that's very much along these lines. So for integrated world modeling theory, the central claim I've made is that consciousness is what it is like to experience a world model that has spatial, temporal, and causal coherence. The reason I focus on this is I take a page from Kant, and I suggest that there are certain coherence-making properties that Kant called the synthetic a priori categories, which he defined as preconditions for judgment. I'm suggesting that not only are these preconditions for coherent judgment, but these coherence properties are preconditions for any kind of sense-making whatsoever. The reason I would suggest this is that in order for a world to be experienced by some system, I suggest that you need to have things relative to other things in some kind of space. We can understand space as degrees of locality, nearness, and farness. The things in that space have to be able to change, and change in some proportional way relative to each other. You could call that time. And there has to be enough regularity in these changes that you can track, model, and predict them. And when you have these things together, then maybe we could have the experience of a world. Without this, you could have modeling of a different kind. I would not call this a world model, and I would not call this consciousness. I would call that just modeling. And so when I think we say consciousness, this what it is likeness, it is specifically the generation of information for the modalities filling in likely sensorium states for an embodied embedded agent. What is the system world state? That would be your consciousness. So to bring back the theories I'm trying to integrate, I've been informed by integrated information theory and the Global Neuronal Workspace Theory. I'm not going to rehash these now, but the idea would be that we can think of workspaces in Bayesian terms as arenas for model selection. As Dennett calls it, fame in the brain, picking a winning interpretation of what's likely to be happening. And so IIT claims that the consciousness is a maximal complex of integrated information or self-cause effect power. IIT locates this towards the back of the brain in something they call a posterior hot zone. GNWT suggests that you need more of a frontoparietal synchronized, largely beta frequencies, larger set of integrated activity, and that this would give you global availability, the ability to bring together information of otherwise segregated specialist processes, and then get this synergistic inference of the information and then broadcast it back out so the specialists can do their thing. I think this is basically correct, but we can think of this in multiple ways. We can have multiple kinds of workspaces of varying degrees of globality. With respect to phenomenal consciousness, I would suggest that this posterior hot zone could be interpreted as a fairly global workspace. However, if we're talking about something like conscious access, then I think we need a different kind of workspace with the frontal lobes in the mix, a kind of virtual machine where you're doing things, different kinds of fictive actions and moving around attention over working memory, and that this would be and parameterizing mental simulations in different ways, and this is what we would mean by conscious access. So I'm basically saying that IIT and GNWT are both correct, but they're talking about different things. And if they could just agree to use words differently, then, or if they could just agree on a more fine-grained use of terminology, then maybe there wouldn't be so much disagreement. So in my integration attempt, I have also made use of Selwyn Adesoy's connectome harmonics framework, and specifically thought of neural synchrony as entailing marginalization over the network so synchronized, entailing, so this joint marginal belief would be, if it's over your whole sensorium, that could entail a kind of sample from a world model, an inference of what's going on for the agent in the world. I specifically focus on alpha frequencies as reflecting this passive sampling from the environment for updating the world model. And the reason I do this is if you look at the sources of alpha synchronization in the scope, that's what would allow you to have the entire posterior lobes in the mix. And it also, though, has a lot of power from these midline structures, the posterior cingulate and precuneus. These areas have things like stretch receptor information from the neck via the mammillary bodies, the vestibular apparatus. So basically, you take your sensorium, you peg it by an egocentric reference frame, and now you can have a better chance of having a coherent experienced world. Although I suspect that consciousness itself is probably clocking twice as fast as at beta frequencies. So I've been looking at different machine learning principles to try to understand what the computational bases are. And so I have these autoencoders that I've folded over at their low-dimensional bottlenecks. Ryota also suggested something very similar. My suggestion is that once you have a large enough scope of integration, a synchronization manifold that roughly would be refreshed alpha frequencies, this is what would allow for the experience of a world. Probably with visual spatial awareness around midline structures and somatospatial awareness at inferior lateral parietal areas. And taken together, you have the experience of a world as a shared latent space with a lived body at its center. And I also claim that this shared latent space, which Ryota and others have talked about very compellingly, might be structured according to principles of geometric deep learning. And so the idea would be that the latent space is actually a kind of space. And this is providing a lingua franca for sense making and information integration across otherwise alien to each other's specialist processes. That, I think, is all I have time for today. Thank you so much for your time and attention.